everyone. Welcome to the 7th session of the 2023 Words, Ideas, and Thinkers Festival. May I take this moment to encourage you to please silence your phones. Thank you. I'm Susan Choi. It is my enormous pleasure to be here today with you to introduce Isaac Fitzgerald and Saeed Jones. Before I dive in, let me also thank our wonderful partners for this year's festival: Stoneover Farm, Berkshire Magazine, Red Lion Inn, the Berkshire Eagle, Whistler's Inn, the bookstore in Lenox, Wine and Spirits Magazine, Mahawi Theater, and the Norman Rockwell Museum. Thank you to all of you. So, I got to be the kid in the back seat of the car yesterday as Isaac Fitzgerald drove me and Saeed Jones up here from New York. I could say for an easy laugh that this gave me the opportunity to eavesdrop on their conversation the way kids do when their parents, if you will please visualize incredibly harmonious parents who finish each other's sentences when they're not laughing too hard to actually speak. But eavesdropping wasn't even possible because from the minute we all got together in the car, I was in it too, invited to the party that is continually going on with these two people since their best friendship at first sight more than 10 years ago. By the time we arrived here in Lenox about 8 hours later due to horrible traffic, we had not finished talking about a couple thousand different topics. Clearly, this is what happened back at the start of the previous decade when Saeed and Isaac, after meeting at a conference they'd come to from separate locations, started an ebullient conversation with each other on the thing once known as Twitter, as if they were alone at a bar, except with the whole world listening. I'm a Twitter ignoramus, but sitting in the back of that car, I could understand why countless strangers would want to listen to these two talk. I could also understand why BuzzFeed News put Saeed and Isaac in front of actual cameras 5 days a week for its morning show AM to DM, a situation that the kid in the back seat of that car suspects made both men, who are destined to join the ranks of our most significant writers, not of our TV news anchors, pretty miserable. But I get it. I understand why Saeed and Isaac love meeting the world alongside each other and why the world loves being there for it too. Saeed and Isaac approach each other with an openness and curiosity and utter willingness to be vulnerable, go to the dark places, and laugh hard if they want to, which is what is so powerful about both of their memoirs. This is the shared quality of theirs that makes their writing, for me, so singularly alive and indispensable. It doesn't hurt that they're both former editors who know how to put words together, that Isaac also writes for children, a high calling, or that Saeed's astonishing poetry is the kind I like to read by the volume at a time when no one's going to bother me, which I can say about very few living poets. So welcome to the car ride without the car. One of the things I hope they'll share with you today is what they each think the memoir genre is for, why they each decided to write one, and whether it did for each of them what they were hoping it would do. I also am hoping to learn if they engage with each other's works in progress, or if they just amaze each other with their completed accomplishments. Speaking of those accomplishments, here is the staggering list of them, in alpha order by author last name. Isaac Fitzgerald is the New York Times best-selling author of Dirtbag, Massachusetts, winner of a New England Book Award. He appears frequently on the Today Show, I hope wearing that jacket, and is also the author of the best-selling children's book, How to Be a Pirate, as well as co-author of Pen and Ink, Tattoos and the Stories Behind Them, and Knives and Ink, Chefs and the Story Behind Their Tattoos, winner of an IACP award. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Esquire, The Guardian, The Best American Non-Required Reading, and numerous other publications. Isaac is a former co-owner of The Rumpus, where he edited early work by authors we now consider household names, such as Roxane Gay and Cheryl Strayed. He lives in Brooklyn and is currently working on his next book, American Dionysus, about Johnny Appleseed. Saeed Jones' debut poetry collection, Prelude to Bruise, was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award and was awarded the 2015 Penn Joyce Osterweil Award for Poetry. NPR described Prelude as a book seamed in smoke. It is a dance that invites you to admire the supple twist of its narrative spine. It is hard and glaring and brilliant. In 2019, Saeed released his highly anticipated memoir, How We Fight for Our Lives. As The New Yorker observed, his title carries an edge of social critique. To be Black, gay, and American, the book suggests, is to fight for one's life. The memoir won the 2019 Kirkus Prize for Nonfiction, a 2020 Lambda Literary Award, as well as a 2020 Stonewall Book Award. Saeed's latest, Alive at the End of the World, is a poetry collection published in fall 2022. Please welcome Saeed Jones and Isaac Fitzgerald.
Come on, let's keep it going for Susan Choi, National Book Award winner.
That was so beautiful. It doesn't take much to get Isaac to cry, but you got me a little misty too. That was really beautiful. Thank you.
I was gonna try and get like halfway through this before tears.
We all have goals.
That was lovely. So we thought we would open up with just a brief reading from each of us, and then we're just gonna dive right in. Does that sound good? All right, fantastic. Being indecisive this morning, I decided that I'd read from the beginning. Right? Why not start there? My parents were married when they had me, just to different people.
Buckle up.
That's the way I open every story when I'm asked about my childhood. I was a child of passion, a happy little accident. Or, put another way, I was born of sin, a mistake in human form, a bomb aimed perfectly to blow up both my parents' lives. My mother grew up in a big old red house in north central Massachusetts, a hill town surrounded by river towns, all of them now emptied of hill people and river people, their main streets boarded up after most of the industrial jobs moved down south before moving out of the country entirely. The house dated back to the 1700s, set on a farm on an ancient turnpike. My mother grew up there among sheep. There's more. Chickens, there we go. Amongst sheep, chickens, and geese, and even a few horses and a goat. Her parents, flinty and unforgiving people who loved the land. My mother worked hard, went to a respectable college in Maine, married a Unitarian minister. They had a little boy, Joel. Her life was idyllic, apart from the restlessness of her heart. My father was born to mill workers in New Bedford, Massachusetts. In the 1800s, the town had been one of the world's largest and most important whaling ports. Melville mentioned it in the opening pages of Moby Dick. You can still visit the Seaman's Bethel today and admire its bow-shaped pulpit. You should know, however, that the church installed it only after Moby Dick was published. The image and invention of Melville's, and that the novel itself was mostly written far from the sea, closer to where my mother grew up, in the whale-shaped hills of Pittsfield, Massachusetts. I'm telling no one in this room anything they don't already know.
Shout out to Pittsfield. We got some fans in the house tonight.
My mother's family didn't have much, and my father's family had less. New Bedford, like any good fishing port, was a rough town back then, And when he was growing up, my father made trouble the way children in rough towns do. But he was also the first of his family to go to college, after which he got a job selling textbooks and eventually married his high school girlfriend. They had a daughter, Carrie. My parents' lives mirrored one another's in many ways. Both had married their high school sweethearts, both had kids already, both had nice lives that they could have kept on living until they died. Both were smart, itchy, unsteady people who had read too many books. If such a thing is possible, and I'm pretty sure it is. When the whaling industry began to fall apart, many of the whalers moved west to California, hoping to find their fortune. I mention this only because before they met each other, both of my parents did the same, moved to California looking for a better life. But both returned to the East Coast without discovering whatever kind of gold it was that they'd been seeking. Years later, believing I was the first in my family to do so, I would do the same, only to find that in an attempt to escape my parents' shadows, I had simply been following their stained and tattered map.
So I'm going to read a pretty seismic poem, personally, from my new book, Alive at the End of the World, which is a collection about personal grief, while, as we all are, collectively enduring and grieving our present moment. You know, it's this living stuff is hard, but you know, now we're having to do everything at once, to say the least. My mother, Carol Sweet Jones, raised me as a single parent, and in May of 2011, the night before Mother's Day, she had what ultimately was a fatal heart attack. And heart disease pointedly, disproportionately impacts African-American women in this country. In 2019, I published my memoir, How We Fight for Our Lives, in which she appears in dramatic fashion. And then I started working on this book in the middle of a pandemic that was also disproportionately impacting Black people, Black women in particular. And so I just had all of these, what is Toni Morrison? Circles and circles of sorrow, you know, this resonance as I was sitting down. And I did not plan to write this poem. This poem came kind of barreling toward me one morning. Saeed, how dare you make your mother into a prelude? And then night neons itself inside me, and I begin missing you in loud, new ways. The sky burns itself bright, then bruises black. Things fall from the sky, and those things might be water, but could just as well be boys, or bombs, or billionaires, or birds. Honestly, between your death and me, it doesn't matter. Or I don't know, or I wasn't looking, or I couldn't see, because I've made a home out of how much I miss you. And there's no one here to tell me I should leave. Alone and night neoned, I write, read, drink, drug, grieve, and all America keeps teaching me is that there are so many ways to die in America, which frankly is quite confusing because this country killed you a decade ago. And I'm still writing, reading, drinking, drugging, grieving, binging, blacking out in the cozy, claustrophobic home I've made out of how very, very much I miss you. And the sky keeps throwing down consequences and corrections and histories and nations. I mean, come on. Who can blame me for not wanting to go back outside? You? A whole decade ghosted? Grounded and ground down into unreliable memories, dollar word metaphors? No, not you. Mother as mortar and pestle. Mother as son mangling meaning out of his mother's misfortune. Mother as second draft. Sorry. But it's awfully true. You are prelude, and your progeny, loud and unrelenting in your epilogue, somehow has to live on as your last sentence, uncompleted. Thank you. And so as I said, that poem, there are lions in the room like Rita Dove. I feel it's like once a decade a poem barrels at you, maybe, and comes like mostly fully formed. It is not a regular occurrence. And so when it happens, I find it to be, like a kind of like getting struck by lightning. You're illuminated, but also burnt. And so I woke up the next morning and freaked out. Like, what did I just write? Oh my, even just the writing was panicking me, to say nothing of the fact that maybe I should publish this. And so I woke up the next morning and immediately regretted the title, Saeed, how dare you make your mother into a prelude. And so since I decided that the point of this book was to try to create an art object that resonates and responds to so much of what feels like our very cataclysmic work in progress, then that should be a part of the work too. And so you turn the page, and as the book was on its side, you turn the page, and instead of a poem, there's a footnote. Saeed wonders if the poem you just read would have been better served by a different title. I'll give you something to cry about. Or, after Carol Sweet Jones. Or, after redacted for the sake of the subject's privacy. Or, a decade into grief, Saeed gets lost in the fog between candor and shamelessness. Or, if you cry hard enough, any grief can be the end of the world. Or, Saeed wonders if he or his mother is the protagonist. Or, alive at the end of the world. Or, did I just trick myself into writing another memoir? Or, in this America, how can I call myself a good son and wish my mother, a Black woman, was still here? Thank you.
So I want to start with that.
Okay.
Because it's amazing. But I want to talk, we are talking about memoir and memory. Yeah. But you are working in two very different art forms. Or I don't mean to make assumptions. Sure. But when you write memoir and you write poetry, are you tackling subjects differently? What does it mean to be writing about your family, your mother, that loss in memoir? And then how does it feel to be looking at through the lens of a poet?
Yeah, the short answer is I think with poetry I feel such freedom. I worked on the memoir really from the earliest iterations, the earliest chapters, almost a decade. And the last half of that decade, I was in a newsroom. And then the last 3 years I was working on the book, a man named Donald Trump became president. And I say that to say that I'm in a newsroom in the evenings, on my own, working on this memoir, right? Surrounded by journalists, being assailed for telling the truth, for having ethics, and so it was just, and then when I started to write the memoir, I had not planned on writing about my mom passing away. How We Fight for Our Lives was going to end, like 3 or 4 years before she passed away because I didn't think I was ready at the time, so it just, the heat in terms of the demands of integrity I felt for this book, for this memoir, just got hotter and hotter, and I was just sweating it out, as I was working on it, because the only thing I think more difficult perhaps than I don't know I'll ask you. I don't know what's easier, writing about family members that are alive or writing about family members who aren't here anymore to advocate for themselves. It's a rock and a hard place. So, it worked out. I'm still proud of the memoir, you know what I mean? I have no regrets, and what a blessing. But poetry, because of the eye in poetry can be so many things, and you can draw from persona, you can draw from mythos, there's so many options. I felt tremendous freedom. Like the fact that I can make a poem out of alternate titles, right? That's incredible. And I just remember like the nuance that allowed me with this new book was so cool, because with the memoir, the burden, as I mentioned, of that integrity is so high that I take creative risk, and I think there's some flourishes and some choices that I'm proud of in the memoir, but you kind of need to keep it on the rails. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, do you want to have a good time and go crazy, or do you want to tell the truth? And you may not always be able to do both. Poetry, I think I feel a little bit more at ease, Yeah, but what about you? I mean, this is your first nonfiction memoir. You're working on another nonfiction book now. What's it like writing about family members when you are still very much a part of their lives?
Well, so this is the beautiful thing where we get into one of our interesting talks. Because like I'm in this place of like, don't get me wrong, I believe in the truth. And I believe truth is under attack right now.
Okay.
But my people, we like to tell stories.
You do.
We like to tell stories.
Okay.
And so for me, part of what I wanted to attack with this memoir was I knew my family's way of looking at these years were different than my own. And I want to talk about that a little bit. My parents were grown. I know this now. I'm so happy that I wrote this book when I was in my mid-30s and not my mid-20s. If I had written this book when I was in my mid-20s, it would have just been anger. And no
score settling.
Exactly. Yeah. No leniency. Exactly. But in my 30s, all of a sudden I realized, I was like, wait, time shifts. So for my parents, those were a rough few years. But when you're 8, 3 or 4 years is half your life. That's a rough half of your life. And so for my parents, I knew that was a rough, they've always been very easy acknowledging it, which I deeply, deeply feel indebted to them for. But they very much see the whole span of their life, whereas for me, this thing felt monumental. And it's the same thing being a child when an adult comes home. An adult has had maybe a bad day with their boss. An adult has had traffic. An adult has had all this other difficult things, right? For a kid, the home is their whole world. Right. And that adult looms so large. So I knew that while they acknowledge these stories, I know that they also see them differently. So for me, when I get at that, I do believe in the truth, but I also understand that people look at the truth differently. Mm-hmm. And so that's something I kind of wanted to try and tackle in this book. If you make it all the way through and you get to kind of the last essays, I get more descriptive about some of the things that happen. But I also get more descriptive about the fact that there were things I completely believed about myself that was true to who I thought I was as a person. That was just wrong. It wasn't their fault. Just some adult said something once, and I just grabbed onto that as my identity. Yeah. And I didn't ask any questions. Right. I thought I was 100% Irish. I ain't. But it's all to say that for me was part of the joy of diving into this, was acknowledging almost a reinvestigation of these things that I thought I knew to be true, and trying to separate the truth from the story. And sometimes that's very difficult.
That's such an interesting contrast, because you're like, my people are storytellers. My people, as in my family, are not. I actually come from a pretty. My mom and it was one of the. My mom and I were the talkers. We were the conversationalists, and it drove everyone crazy. So I come generally from a family that doesn't find conversation especially interesting. It's utilitarian, and history isn't something that's revisit. It's like pulling teeth, and I have my aunt Celia, my mom's older sister. We are still in touch, and I try to make, and we talk, but it's like it's an exercise. I can feel, I don't know if you have family members like this who are like not used to talking about their experiences. They're not used to, and I want to say this isn't a moral thing. I think there's something to be said for like There are many people in this country who are not used to being asked questions in good faith, right? Who are not used to being viewed as an authority on their experience, as historian, personal historians. And so just going like, what was it like? How did you feel? Do you remember? Those are questions that actually, as writers, we're very used to, but I think a lot of people actually don't. And so, it was interesting, even past the act of working on a memoir and past the act of this book in real time, I'm still learning about how people come to a different relationship with memory and personal history. And I'm so grateful, to have made it into, well into the third decade of my life, because you do, I think with time and fortune and effort, you can begin to have an appreciation for how people are, Yeah, you can begin to move hopefully past judgment into empathy.
Yeah, and into recognizing that nobody bats 1,000, which is such a basic way to put it, but nobody bats 1,000. I mean, this is just a real quick moment, but my mom reads the book. She's a very smart woman. She's incredibly well-read. It's something that is in the book. My parents both gave me a love of literature. And she wrote me a letter that I didn't even know I was expecting. And I'm gonna keep that private because that was just a beautiful moment between us. And that was amazing. But then she did that, she's still a mom.
She has some footnotes?
She was just like, there was a lot more camping. Where are the canoe trips? Izzy Fitz?
I just realized something I miss about Twitter is every once in a while your mom would tweet me. She would reply to tweet.
Yeah, she's out here in the streets. She's out here in the streets.
Madam Fitzgerald's out in the streets.
Yeah.
I love it.
And she's amazing. And so and it was a very good point. But what I'm lucky in that she's so educated and so well read is I said something to her that resonated. And I said, Mom, I know that the truth is like a block of wood. And I know that you would carve a much different sculpture from that truth and highlight different aspects of it than I have done to make this work of art. And she immediately was like, you're right. I understand that. And that's such a blessing because she didn't have to give me that. But the fact that she was able to acknowledge, okay, I see that this is a work of art and you're highlighting certain aspects. She's like, but the next book, more canoeing, right? And to be honest, I am going camping a little bit more. There will be a little bit more of that.
Oh, yeah.
Well, sorry, if you had something to say, but go.
Well, let's go for the throat. It's time to make Isaac cry. So,
God.
we've been friends for a decade, more. It's incredible. What a gift. I hope everyone in this room has many long-lasting friendships in your lives, and I hope you have many more ahead of you, because it's such a miracle. And as I've been listening to Isaac, just here, I'm really struck because when we became friends, something that was immediately apparent about Isaac is that he loves to champion other people. He drives me crazy with his many, I'm trying not to curse, his many, there's the curse word, you hear it, slogans. You heard it? His many slogans. And one of them was just all boats rise. And he means it. So when I met Isaac, what I'm trying to say is, at times it seemed like he was most happy, most enthusiastic when supporting and celebrating other people, which is an incredible quality, right? And you hear the empathy, which, for example, he speaks about his parents. But early on in our friendship, I also started to notice the dark side of that moon, which was he would bestow the miracle of empathy and grace and celebration upon other people, but not himself. And so one of the things I think as I want to talk about is one, because it's fun to make Isaac cry and I really enjoy it. It's just like such an easy perk, It's important to find little things that make you happy, and this is one of them for me. But two, as an artist, I feel that you have, because I can only tell you what I've observed. I actually feel that through the writing of this book, and because of the demands of integrity with writing a memoir, I feel like you've learned to bestow empathy upon yourself. Because a memoir, it's really interesting, right? Like you can, and I feel like this would often, and I wonder if this happened to you. You can write a draft where you're doing an excellent job characterizing everybody else, you know? And then your editor's like, that's great, but like you're a ghost. Like, where are you? You know what I mean? You're, like my editor would be like, you're a block of ice and surrounded by human beings, you know? And then you do it again and you realize you have to do it to yourself. Did writing this book do that? Am I right?
Yeah, it's almost like you're an observant, incredible intellectual writer and poet. Yes, your observations are accurate. First off, that's so kind. Thank you.
It's true, but it's true.
And I do. I'm just, you know me. Usually I do like shirk away a little bit, but I'm
yeah,
not.
It's like you want to make. I used to tell people, I was like, you want to make Isaac run? Give him a compliment. Just watch. Run away.
I'm gonna stand in it.
Stay here.
I'm gonna prove your point.
There you go.
There we go. And it is very much something to grow into oneself. And it's something I really believe, right? We don't become ourselves ever, maybe. We're constantly growing. We're constantly changing. And the process of writing this book absolutely made me see myself in a way that I hadn't before, and made me see myself, perhaps for the first time, as, what's the word I'm looking for here? Somebody that is capable of that growth and change, capable of not just forgiving the other people in my life, but what you're talking about, which is, in a way, in a sense, basically forgiving myself. And what came with that, and I want to hear if you experienced this too with your memoir, but it's because you are examining yourself. And it's so funny to hear that John Cox, who's his editor, who's amazing, said that to you, because I got a similar note from Nancy Miller, who's at Bloomsbury, wonderful editor, because she said the same kind of thing. She's like, woo, you are doing a great job explaining to everybody else.
It was always like, so how do you feel about
yes,
that?
Yeah, exactly.
So how do you feel about, okay, how do you feel about
What are your internal emotions in this moment? And I'm like, I'd rather not examine those.
Exactly.
That's why it's not there. But that's what happens. It forces you to look inwards, and you will find surprising things. And so that, by examining myself, I think I was really scared of what I was going to find. And instead what I found was, oh, I am capable of change. And if I'm capable, so are. And that's really, it was a key. I mean, so observant what you just said. It was a key that unlocked this entire book for me. It's like, oh, I need to stop treating my parents like these big shadowy figures when I was 8 and see them for the humans that they are, incredible, flawed humans that they are. And that's absolutely right. But now I want to turn it back on you. And I wanted to ask this question, but I think it kind of dovetails nicely with, so I want to hear you on that,
Sure.
Examining yourself. But also that decision that you mentioned earlier to put your mother and her and getting to the death in the memoir. What was that decision like? And do you think you were trying to, in a way, run away from it by not putting it in the book initially? Sorry, heavy.
Yeah. Which is, I live there, I think initially, so when I realized that I was writing, like when I went from realizing like, oh, I've got these essays, whatever, to like, this memoir is going to be a thing, and at some point I'm going to need to explain to an editor why they should, pay me money to keep working on it. At that point, I didn't think I was ready. And I think I was, which is to say I was in my late 20s. And as we have both spoken, we spoke with great gratitude to have made it out of that time period. And so I was still in my 20s, and my mom died when I was 25. And so it was only 4 or 5 years later. So I did perhaps somewhat accurately feel it's too soon. I don't know what to say. I'm truly still processing it in real time. Now, of course, as anyone who has experienced grief will tell you, that work is never done. Actually, there is no sunset on grief. It just changes. It just changes and it changes and it changes. And you, as I can tell you, you look up a decade later and you're still engaging it and still being startled by it at times. So I was like the next book. I could grow into being a writer who has the capability, technically, but also emotionally to deal with it. And as it turns out, I'm such a damn slow writer sometimes. I was like, well, no, it could be this book. You write so damn slow, you know. You'll be,
I'm in my 30s.
Be wise as Moses by the time you... but yeah, and then when it came, so the decision to include my mom in the memoir happened because my editor, John Cox, he was like one of the smartest people I've ever gotten to collaborate with, including, I include Isaac in that circle, and someone like Roxanne Gay, and Erica Stevens, who edited the poetry collection. I remember he asked to meet for drinks, which I love. I love meeting for drinks. And we had a wonderful rapport, and with the memoir, there's everything to talk about. So I was like, sure, I would love to, bounce some ideas. And I remember we met, and we were always so at ease with each other. And I remember we're like waiting for the wine, and his knee just wouldn't stop moving. And I was like, what is his problem? Who is nervous about wine? Chill out. I'll order for you. And then I realized it was because there was something he had to tell me. And he took a minute to get there, and then he was like, I think you need to write about your mom. She was already in the book. She was already in the first chapter, right? But he was like, it's just kind of like he was like, one, you're very open, online and in your other like kind of essays and in your poetry, like people know that you've experienced a personal apocalypse, in the way you've lost your mother. So one, like just practically speaking, I'm worried that people are going to have like a sense of dissonance between like Saeed the person and then this memoir, and just like, where is she? It almost feels like she's kind of disappearing, which, if it's not apparent, is like the worst thing that I would ever, I would never want to erase or disappear my mother, right, from my life. So that made me sit up. And then two, he was like, she's also just like an incredible part of this book, and I think you can do it, and I'm not used to relying on assurances from straight white men to do my work. That's not exactly what gets me up in the morning, but now and then, it's kind of helpful.
We have our moments.
every once in a while. Not batting 1,000 or whatever your baseball analogy was, because I don't really do baseball or sports. But yeah, and I don't know, I think, and this is true for our friendship, one of the real gifts of being an artist is when you can foster and cultivate long friendships and collaborations with people, because that will empower them to tell you the truth. That will empower them in good faith and in love to tell you, oh, my bracelet's falling off, to tell you what you need to hear. And so that was an example. Have you, I'm not trying to direct this to a question where you get to praise me, but have you had but we are the only two people on stage. Have you had an experience, though, and particularly with where, because writing a memoir is hard for so many reasons. It's like, I tell people it's like a triathlon. It's like you got to bike, you got to swim, and then when you're exhausted, it's like, now it's time to run. There's so many things that you would be satisfied as an artist just doing one of those things, but you do have a lot. So was there an experience like that with the memoir where you were like, now I have to do what?
Yeah, absolutely. Talk about it once I finish the book.
So you're saying publishing the memoir was
I was like, it's a bad deal. You turn it in, you're like, I worked so hard. And they're like, now guess what? You got to relive it for the next year over and over and over again. And I know you know that. But
I love this because this was actually one of the questions I planned to ask you. Because I was like, I know we talked about the writing, but I was like, for you being your friend, what was it like publishing, promoting, traveling the country, being in cities where your parents can drive to, for example, to talk about this book?
Yeah, it's a very... This is something that I know you're familiar with, and we can talk about it. When you write a piece of fiction, you put it out into the world, and there it is. But you get to just say, yeah, fiction, even if it, But
poetry, I often feel that way.
Exactly.
Even when I'm in it, I'm like, yeah, but it's
that
fun.
freedom you were talking about. That
Little
freedom you were talking about earlier. When you put a memoir out, people are going to again, because they've seen that statue that you've carved from that wood, they think they know everything about you. And they really sometimes want to ask very pointed questions.
Oh, yeah.
And you all of a sudden are feeling extremely vulnerable and starting to feel like you're unable to say, hey, I don't want to talk about that. Especially somebody like myself, which I'm not great with boundaries. So I have a hard time telling people no. And I try, so that was a difficult.
You've gotten much better.
Thank you. That was a difficult aspect of the book. But a beautiful moment that I just want to share is I was in San Francisco. So but part of the secret of Dirtbag, Massachusetts is a lot of it takes place in California. Don't tell anyone.
But you don't walk away from a title like that.
No.
You don't leave that money on the table.
That's right. Just because this is a Massachusetts crowd, you guys will be familiar with this. I grew up in the south end of Boston, actually, and I was part of Haley House, which is this Catholic worker, socialist, all the good things about the Catholic Church, not so much the other stuff. And I loved it, and faith was very important to my family, and faith was very important to me. But then we moved to Athol, Massachusetts. Beautiful area, the Quabbin, stunning. We love it, but we do call it Massachusetts. Sorry, there was
we got a fan in the room.
Exactly.
She gets it.
Exactly. It turns out you can't call a book Massachusetts, or you can.
You could,
but the SE they were like, nobody's going to put it in the bookstore window. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, fair.
And so a friend of mine, Jason Diamond, came up with the title Dirtbag, Massachusetts. And so I took this on tour, and I just want to share this one little moment, which is I was in California, and there was a gentleman, and he raises his hand, and it turns out that this is somebody who knew my parents quite well.
Every memoir writer's dream. Someone in the audience who's like, hi, I have a personal connection. I remember that chapter.
And
you were just so delighted.
But let me tell you, it turned into, I mean, I'm shaking just thinking about it, just a stunning moment. And what he said, again, I'm going to keep it private, but was just so beautiful and elegant and showed a great tenderness and love for my parents, which I share. And I was able to tell him that. And then you could have dropped a pin. And apologies for the person that's going to have to do the radio edit for this. But it was a Q&A moment, but there were still 10 minutes left. But luckily I had a comedian friend in the audience. And like, he let the moment hold, and it was pregnant. And then he just said, follow that off the numbers. And so, again, a long way of saying, at first I was very scared about talking about this memoir, but actually what has happened, the hope for me in this book is that I could have conversations with my parents that I had been unable to have. And if I'd done therapy earlier, maybe I wouldn't have written a book. And I would have figured out how to have those conversations with them, but I didn't. It started later. And so I wrote this book, and I'm so happy to report that it has actually accomplished those goals. I am having some of the best conversations that I've ever had with my family. And so, and with people. So even though I was scared, and I like to joke about how hard it is to go out and talk about a memoir over and over and over again, it's actually led to some of the most fulfilling conversations in my life.
I love that.
Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to ask you a craft question.
Oh, okay, I love craft.
I don't know if you've noticed, he can write. I'm gonna say this. I'm not trying to hide my light under a bushel. I think I'm a great, straightforward writer. But when I finish an essay, I read through it, and he hates when I talk about this. But then I try to pepper in what I call Saeedisms. Because I've written my straightforward story, but then I'm like, I need some of that poetry. I need some of that flair. I need some of that je ne sais quoi. And so you can't overdo it, because that gets too flowery. But I try to add like 3 Saeedisms throughout the essay. And when I tell you, everyone's like, oh, I just love this line. I was like, oh, it's just me trying to be this poet guy. But I wanted to ask you about craft.
Sure.
What your experience of writing poetry and your experience of writing memoir, is it the same? Do you like wake up, sit down with a cup of coffee? Like, let's get into the brass tacks of it all. Like, how do you approach, is it the same writing style? Is it the same writing approach, or is it different?
I think it's, okay, so honestly, almost as soon as I have not finished writing, but I guess I would say after like the first season of promoting a book, like this last book came out last fall. So usually by the time I've like done the tour and I've finished that, I have forgotten how I wrote that damn book. I think you, and I don't think I'm the first person to say something. It feels as if I live and then learn my way into writing the book, and then I forget. And then I have to kind of live and learn my way into the next book. Like when I read my first book, Prelude to Bruise, it came out in 2014. I recorded the audiobook for it actually last summer because I did both audiobooks last summer. And I was like, this is good. This is a good, I've enjoyed these poems. But I was like, how the hell what was, Saeed, you okay? You know, like I really felt, and there's, you know, maybe that's part of the reason why in Alive at the End of the World, there is a doppelganger. You actually see Saeed meeting another version, because I felt othered to myself. So it's a little difficult to answer because each book just feels really different. There are different demands. You know, the race ahead of you is the race ahead of you, and you have to become, I think, the person who can meet that moment. And you might not be that person forever, but you're gonna become that person. Yeah.
Real quick, do you think you would struggle to live there forever? Because you do, you
Oh yeah,
leave
oh my
so much
gosh.
on the page.
The rigor of writing the memoir. I mean, I'm starting to write a new memoir now. Oh gosh. But for How We Fight for Our Lives, I'm very proud of that book. I would not like to have that kind of writing experience again. It was, I did it, but I don't know if it's sustainable to kind of live, you know. It's like every book you write, you go into the woods of yourself. You're alone in this little cabin in the woods. And then as you get closer and closer to publication, you start having to try to walk back out and find like, where are people? Where is everybody? You know, you haven't had a conversation, you know, in months, and now you suddenly, you know, it's just you kind of have to relearn society. But with that kind of memoir, which is to say, you know, it's a coming of age, coming into self memoir, very different from what I'm working on now. That cabin I had, it was way out there, man. You know what I mean? So yeah, but whereas poetry, it doesn't feel like I go that deep. Poetry for me is more like the music behind my days. If I decide I
Saeedism. Sorry, keep going.
the music kind of behind my days, if I decide to have the capacity. Sometimes I don't have the capacity. I don't have the time. You know, I'm traveling right now. Did I wake up this morning and write a poem? No, I woke up, took a shower, and went to breakfast. You know what I mean? But if I decide, like, okay, this is something I want to do, it's like the music behind my days is kind of like, tune into it, tune that radio. And so it for me, sitting down to write a poem, it's not that it's less difficult, it's just different. And it's less personally demanding in that way. Yeah. Hopefully.
No, that's perfect. Now I'm going to go for the throat.
I was like, why are you pulling out your phone?
But it is self-serving. In what ways would you say our friendship, I'll be nice, or other literary friendships you've had in your life have guided your writing? What about your career?
You're good. You're good. Let me count the ways. Isn't that a song? I feel like that's a song. That feels like a song. Isaac, when he was still at the Rumpus, which he founded and led so beautifully. You published, you edited, you and Roxane Gay co-edited the essay How Men Fight for Their Lives. That not only did it become the memoir, but if you've read the memoir, you know that within days of this man in Phoenix, Arizona in 2008, when I was a college student trying to kill me, I started trying to write about it. Because writing has always been, and I think I have a healthier relationship with this dynamic, but writing has always been how I try to reassert control over my life, you know, and it was taken from me, and so I immediately started to write about it, and couldn't. I wrote so many bad versions of that essay. And so it feels significant. Something had to happen, someone had to happen to me. You know, in order for the right, it's like stars kind of have to align sometimes. And you were at least a few of those stars, you know? It doesn't feel insignificant to me that though we were still getting to know each other, we were friends, but we weren't best friends yet, you know?
We lived on other sides of the country.
That was the essay that changed my career, changed my life, and you were a part of it. And Roxanne as well. I mean, Roxanne gave both of us, is a good friend and mentor, and gosh, the generosity of her wisdom is so important. So yeah, I mean, that's an easy example. I think being a writer is, so I'm a Sagittarius, so I think of myself as a party hermit. So like, I like people. I find you interesting. I occasionally sleep with people. Have dinner with them. But
In that order. I'm sorry.
Okay, all right.
Sorry. Too familiar. Sorry.
But I'm fine being alone. I think part of the reason I enjoy being a writer is I don't mind solitude. In fact, I love it. But you need to temper it for many reasons: arrogance, narcissism, a lack of humanity. We've seen brilliant writers, brilliant artists. What happens when they just, it just feels like some artists, my theory, they fully severed themselves from the rest of us. They fully severed themselves from the people who can be truth tellers in their lives. And I think we generally see how that tends to play out. And it's not cute. It's not cute. And so I think also just being your friend, working alongside you, loving you, and being loved by you, has been healthy. It's great we do, to answer one of Susan's questions, when I'm writing poems, I usually take screenshots and I text them to Isaac. When I'm, thinking of titles or whatever, we're in conversation, and that's great. But more than anything, I think it's a real privilege to have someone else that I deeply respect his work. I deeply respect his craft. He's one of the best editors, I've ever gotten to work with and observe, and he's my good friend. And so to be able to have that back and forth, I wouldn't trade it for anything, It's hard to pinpoint exactly how it's manifested, but I know I'm a better person. I know I'm a better literary citizen. I always say, like, Isaac's one of our country's best literary citizens. And so, I think you have colored me in innumerable ways, all for the better. Yeah.
I mean, just for the record, that is very much a two-way street. And I have those
good.
I have those exact feelings about Saeed. But I'm going to put it into, so just yesterday, and shout out to the sponsor, Stoneover Farm.
Stoneover Farm, we love Randy at Stoneover Farm.
We love Randy, and they're fantastic.
He's working,
there.
He has a lot of wedding tours today. Beautiful place.
That's true. We tried to talk the place up as people were showing up. But we were just sitting by his pond at this beautiful place.
Love the
and the ducks were there.
Love those ducks.
And I just got to turn to you, and it felt like you're absolutely right. You can't pinpoint a moment, but you can see the arc of your life and how it has changed because this other person was in it. And I just turned to you, and we clinked glasses, and I just was like, not bad.
Not bad?
Not bad. And that was, I immediately knew it was going to be a moment that I was going to treasure, because I know. No, that's not true. I don't know where I would be without you in my life, but I know it wouldn't have been somewhere like that. And the way that you motivate me, push me to be a truer version of myself, sometimes push me into the spotlight when I'm trying to turn it on you or other people.
Get out there.
Has been so incredibly helpful. And then just one other I have so many beautiful memories with you and so many beautiful moments, but one other memory that comes to mind is when you read the book. And I don't know if you remember this, but you immediately FaceTimed me, and your enthusiasm, the way in which basically the vibe was just, you did it. You did it. Lots of swear words that I'm gonna and then you said something that's also because of Walk It Off, I think you said, but you were like, I see you getting stronger as a writer, and I see you having more faith in yourself. That's what I remember. I see you having more faith in yourself.
So proud.
Yeah, I got you. He crying.
I'm so proud of him.
No,
oh my God.
but I love you so much.
I love you too.
And thank you for being in my life.
I get so emotional. Damn it. Okay.
You did it first. He did it first.
You
This
jerk.
time.
Okay. Oh, it ricocheted. Oh, what the? Okay. This is the longest either of us have gone of cursing like the entire week. I get so emotional because I am so proud of you. And I know how hard it is to grow. I know how hard it is to change, just inherently. But also I want to say something that I think we should acknowledge is this country and culture in which we live. It's hard for all of us, to be clear. But I think we're in a cultural moment where this has been going on for some time, but damn it, I think we're much more aware of what men are suffering for as a result of not growing, as a result of not having healthy, meaningful connections, not having vulnerability. It's not just nice, it's essential. And when you don't have this, thank you, when you don't have it in your life, it is an apocalypse. That's the end of the world. That's the end of the world. And I think that's an inherent tragedy for any person to live that way, to grow into that kind of ravine. But also, as we see, it often comes at great cost to the rest of us. And I had a moment a couple of summers ago where I'm not going to mention where I was, but I was teaching a workshop and I was faced with the most sexist, misogynist, violent male writer I think I've ever had to deal with in a workshop and teach. I mean, was fully shook. You know, it's like, think whatever scenario you can think of in workshop, just assume that it was, I was like, I think I was texting, people like Roxanne, like I was calling on every resource, and that I could think of to try to meet the moment for this student and also protect everyone else in this workshop, which happened to be all women, queer people, except for this one person. I was like, oh, man. And we got through it. But I can't explain what it felt like a few days later to realize that the book that I wanted this student to read, the book that I wanted him to read so he could understand that it's possible as a man to account for what you've done, to account for what you've experienced, and to create something of meaning, and not just, and that the book was Isaac's book. And I don't know if you've had an experience where you're just like bowled over by a circumstance and a problem, and you're just, oh my God. And then just that moment where you realize because of someone in your life, help is on the way. That's what I felt like. I was like, the book isn't out yet. We gotta wait a few more months. But I just remember just like kind of sitting upright in my room at one point when I realized, I was like, that's the book. Your book, I think, is saving lives. It's saving lives, and the work you do in your life has saved mine, and so that's why it is hard. It's so hard, but when I say you're a miracle in my life, this is what I mean,
And again, that's a two-way street. We're gonna open up for Q&A real quick, but could you?
Is it like 6 p.m.?
Yeah. But could you take us out with a poem, especially talk about the end of the world?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Jesus. Oh man. Was it an 8-hour drive? I feel. Where are we? Iowa? Okay. Emotions, man. It's like, why are we even doing this? Sure. One of the phenomenons of this era that we're in that I wanted to capture in the structure of the book was what I call like the violence of repetition. Shootings, for example, threats against reproductive justice, cops shooting innocent Black people, and then being rewarded for it. You're kind of like, which one? Just like you get the news push notification and you can't even keep up, and you begin to feel like punished for trying to keep up with everything going on around you. That's something I've been trying to wrap my mind around. And so there's several poems in the book with the same title to acknowledge that kind of like, didn't that just happen? Is this a typo, you know? Alive at the End of the World. And this poem is dedicated to the victims, the survivors, and the community around the Pulse nightclub shooting. It's striking to me that I could write a poem about an incident like that, which took place in 2016, June 2016. And within a month of this book being published, there was a similar shooting in Colorado Springs at Q nightclub. Alive at the End of the World. The End of the World was a nightclub. Drag queens with machetes and rhinestoned machine guns guarded the red and impassable door on Friday nights. Just to look at the crowd, all dressed up and swaying outside, made people want to yell the truth about themselves to anyone who'd listen. But no one heard. The end of the world was loud. The end of the world leaked music like radiation, and we loved the neon echo, even though it taunted us, or maybe because it taunted us. Kids leaning out of windows hours after bedtime. Cab drivers debating fares at the curb just for an excuse to linger. Pastors who'd pause at the corner and vow that if they ever got inside, they'd burn it all down.
Ladies and gentlemen, Saeed Jones.
Thank you. Isaac Fitzgerald.
So, note to you all, if you ever do an introduction, remember Susan Joy, who embedded her questions into her intro. I love this. This is genius introduction.
Give it up one more time for Susan
yes,
Joy.
Susan, amazing. And this is the point of a festival like this, where themes and ideas and moments keep repeating. The power of grief. How even in our grief, there are moments of so much beauty in the world that we hold on to. The power of our memory of our parents and how that shifts. Maya's beautiful, and Emma's, if Emma's here, talk yesterday. And that white whale just keeps showing up. We're gonna pull up the house lights and we're gonna take a few minutes of Q&A. And woman in the second row, please.
Why do you feel you have to clean up your language for a group like this that's twice your age and some has seen it all?
So let me repeat the question.
Yes, Lynn, please.
In other words, you.
Go
Well
ahead, Lynn.
served.
Repeat the question.
The question was, why do you youngsters think you have to clean up your language for us? But I will tell you that New England public media will really appreciate that.
So this is what I want to say. One, you're wonderful and we love you. Two, I'm pretty sure you'd beat me in a knife fight, and I appreciate that about you.
You've already been stabbed, didn't even notice it.
But three, yes, it's because it might re-air on public radio. So we're trying to be
We're
a
good
little,
now. We're F-bomb away.
Oh,
We're
that's
good now.
Clear.
But you're fucking great.
Next question.
Oh, I love it.
How about here, man in the second row? Yeah.
Oh man, we're all just going through
Oh,
it.
I love it.
you. Oh my gosh.
So,
Woo!
can I speak to that? Was beautiful. Thank you. Can I speak to it for a quick second, though? So, I'm going to repeat the question for those. Basically, there was a fear about AI, but just a really beautiful words about how human emotion, which I truly believe conquers all. I'm a big Terminator 2 guy. We'll win in the end. We'll get the robots. But what I really do want to say, you're absolutely right, and thank you for that. That was
Thank
beautiful.
you.
But two, I just need you to know. Again, I'm a youngster, but I've lived some life. And I remember we started the idea of the culture magazine, The Rumpus, was because book coverage was shrinking in local media markets. And the idea was we're going to try and cover the books, not the ones that are getting the front page of the New York Times book review. God bless them, glad they're there. But we're going to cover some of the smaller things. I'll never forget. It's 2008, and everyone was like, ebooks, ebooks. Ebooks, like it was a werewolf coming to get us all. And they're like, they're gonna put videos in the middle of the prose, and the kids are gonna eat it up, and they're gonna love it, and books will die. No, books are fine. Books are fine. It's a perfect technology. It feels good to carry a book. You're absolutely right, the human emotion. But the fact of the matter is, the world is ever shifting, absolutely. But there are certain things about humanity and stories that just give me a goddamn AI that can do what Saeed Jones does. And you're just never going to find it because he is a singular person.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very nice.
Yeah, I think that's it. Also, I just the one other thing I would say, anxiety is a certainly valid emotion, right? And it's like I wouldn't dissuade us from being anxious. I say, but pay attention to the anxiety. Don't let it rule you, right? Like the future, something I've been thinking about is like the future isn't necessarily something that just has to happen to us. The future is something that we are cultivating in real time. And so what you value, what you love, do. And you are. We're here because we believe in these kinds of spaces. It's like a way of voting on the future of culture we want to participate in, And so I think, and I feel I have to remind myself of this all the time, that it's like, no, it's not just, I get to decide my future. I get to participate in it as well. And I think at times we can almost like vote ourselves out, erase ourselves from the narrative, as if it's just being built around us. Yes, there are other factors at play, right? But let's not count ourselves out in this.
Amen.
I think we have time for a couple more. How about the young woman in the no, right behind you. No, young lady with the
Yes.
You're it.
you're it.
Gosh, thank you. So that was so, oh gosh, y'all are just great. So the question was about, particularly when working on a memoir, which is quite an emotional, mental, and long undertaking. How did we handle, acknowledge our mental health? I'll say it's fucking hard. It is no small thing to write a memoir, and I think everyone who thinks they want to do it needs to start thinking about that right away. Do it now, because you're gonna need it. For example, not during most of the writing, but I would say from the time that copy edits started until several months after the book tour ended. So let's say a period of a year, I dreamed of my mother every single night. It was not always about her, but she would appear. I could have a dream that was about me and Isaac being on stage in an event, and at some point in the dream, I would look and like my mom might be sitting in the back pew. Wow. Sometimes it might be an intense one-on-one, every single night. And I think that's just like an example of just like it's embedded. It's something's going on, in your subconscious. Therapy is important, obviously, but specifically, I think my therapist was really good, like during the writing. And I would be like, I wrote a section, like in Memphis, a church scene with my grandmother that's very difficult. I don't even read it at public events because it's so difficult. When I was writing it, he would like kind of walk me through the memory, even though I was like, I wrote it, I know what happened. He was like, yeah, I know, but let's do this. How did you feel when she did this? How did you feel, and I at first was like, but then I saw the value. And then later in the publication process, my therapist at the time was really thoughtful about like, okay, how are you going to feel if someone stands up in the audience at an event and asks you about XYZ? Or, do you want to read that chapter? He was very good at kind of creating viable, plausible scenarios, I guess, that I would need to anticipate and like have a plan for. And I found that to be really helpful. And then the one other thing is, having truth tellers, having close friends. Sometimes, it wasn't always, but there were times when the writing was too difficult. And it meant that I was like almost dooming myself to an entire afternoon just crying. And I had that experience a couple of times while trying to finish the book. And being able to text a friend, I'm thinking of my friend Lucas, who Isaac knows as well. And Lucas just being like, stop writing, I'm on my way, let's go hang out. Like sometimes you need to stop doing the work. It's not healthy and sustainable. And so I think developing a relationship with vulnerability, whether it's a mental health professional or a friend, I think you need a whole team, where you can kind of be in dialogue about that. Because you can't do this work by yourself in a healthy way.
I'm just going to say one that I completely agree with everything Saeed said. And I'm also going to say this is one of the many ways in which Saeed has saved me, and it's very tangible, which is I snapped at him. Sorry, I didn't know that was going to be one. I clearly feel bad about it. But I did.
It's truly fun.
We were working together, and I spoke to him in a way I should not have spoken to him. And instead of giving it back to me, instead of being angered or going quiet, he took me outside the room, and he said, I think it's time that you really think about talking to a mental health specialist. I had never considered therapy up until that moment. I had a real skewed view that I can see now, is that I thought if I did therapy, it would take away my art. I felt like these stories and the way that they ping-ponged inside of me are what drove me to be a writer. And I was wrong. And this book would not have been possible if he hadn't told me to go start seeing a therapist. And I've seen that therapist now for 3 years, and it has changed my life, and it's made me a better writer. And that's because of him.
Love you. Thank you for that question.
We're going to stop now. It's just about 2:15.
Only 2:15.
But Patrick O'Keefe, come on, ladies and
awesome.
gentlemen. Yeah, come on, we're excited for that one.
Yes,
He's so
we are.
nice.
He's so nice. Patrick will be here with his editor, and that's another theme that's come up all festival about the importance of a great editor. And Daniel Zalewski has been editing Patrick for years. These two guys are going to be out front signing their books, and we'll see you back here at 3.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone, let's give it up for Lynn and the entire WIT team. Everyone that's
you
making
so
this
much.
incredible festival happen here in Lenox. For the Authors Guild, thank you.